Welcome to this presentation on engaging in a needs assessment and root cause analysis. This presentation is designed for school leadership team members, school leaders, teachers, parents, and any other members of the school community who are involved in developing the school's comprehensive education plan, or CEP. My name is Will Manicus, and I am Senior Director of State Federal Program Implementation and Field Support within the Division of School Leadership. Let's take a look at our objectives for this webinar. First, we'll review our commitment to continuous improvement, that is, making our schools better. Then, we'll look at the individual activities that comprise Step 2, engage in a needs assessment. These include exploring how to dig deep into student data to discover gaps in student skills and knowledge, gathering information to examine school and instructional practices, engaging in a root cause analysis to really get to the heart of any issues, and finally, using what is learned from the needs assessment to inform the action steps that the school community will need to take in order to address the root causes and achieve its goals. Chancellor David C. Banks has shared the 5 system-wide priorities for New York City public schools, and these ideas are at the core of the work all schools do. The first is ensuring all students learn to read well. We must foster a system-wide culture of literacy to achieve higher levels of proficiency for our students. The second is that all students are physically and emotionally safe. This includes implementing best practices for safety and security, expanding social-emotional support, improving attendance practices, and expanding physical and mental wellness supports. The third priority is that all students have a high-quality academic experience. This requires us to strengthen core instruction, as well as the programs that serve our multilingual learners and students with disabilities, along with elevating arts and civics to reimagine school and re-engage our students. The fourth priority is that all students graduate college and career ready and have a strong plan and pathway to economic security. For our high school students, this means expanding career pathways and college and career advising, as well as providing opportunities to earn college credit and industry credentials. For our younger students, it means expanding access to advanced Regents coursework, specialized high school exam preparation, exposure to careers, and supporting a college-going culture from an early age. The fifth priority is redesigning the system to be more inclusive and responsive for parents and families, including having more families choose New York City public schools. This speaks to deeply engaging with families to better understand their needs, building community trust, bolstering engagement, improving language access, and ultimately increasing family engagement and participation. These 5 priorities set the vision for New York City public schools, and your school's 2023-24 CEP will be aligned to these priorities, which is a shift from the past. All of this work requires authentic engagement from the very beginning, And there's no better way to engage families and your school leadership team in the CEP development process than to seek their thoughts, ideas, and opinions as you begin your needs assessment. Your school community's thoughts and ideas around each of the 5 priorities will live in your CEP. Meaningful engagement in this process requires us to study, return to, and adjust the CEP so that it becomes the roadmap for your school's success. When we specifically think about continuous improvement regarding the CEP, we think about the 4 steps of the plan, do, study, act, or PDSA cycle. First, we plan. What are we trying to improve, and what strategies will we choose? Next, we do, actually implementing the plan as it was designed. Then, we study. How well are we doing? It's important to monitor both implementation and interim results. Then ask, are we on track to meet our annual goal? Finally, we act. Based on what we've learned, what do we need to adjust in our strategy? The PDSA cycle is our framework for continuous improvement. Here is a brief overview of the CEP development process. First, we identify the priority areas, which, new for this year, align to the Chancellor's 5 system-wide priorities. Unlike previous years, where elementary and middle schools responded to different areas of concentration from high schools, this year, all schools will engage in educational planning aligned to the same system-wide priorities. Schools should begin by reviewing the priorities, which are detailed on slide 3 of this presentation. The iPlan portal, which can be accessed at iplanportal.com, is the collaborative online platform for educational planning, and it automatically displays the priorities. The next step is engaging in a comprehensive needs assessment and root cause analysis, resulting in the identification of priority needs and root causes, and that's the focus of this session. The next steps will be covered in depth during other webinar modules, but to give a brief preview here, the priority needs that emerge from Step 2 will be used in Step 3 to drive the development of SMART goals. Step 4 is to set progress monitoring targets that will keep the school on track toward achieving its annual goals. Step 5 is to create progressive action steps that address the root causes we identify here. Step 6 emphasizes the importance of engaging family and community stakeholders by incorporating strategies that empower families and the wider community. Step 7, which is the final step in CEP development, is to align budgetary resources to the goal, making sure that they're allocated in a way that supports the school achieving its annual goal. One of the first parts of the needs assessment process is engaging in a gap analysis, which can help illustrate the differences between where we are currently and where we'd like to be. Gaps can occur in knowledge, skills, or practice. The gap analysis will help set the foundation for developing action plans later on. As your SLT analyzes the differences between where the school currently is and where it would like to be, priority needs will begin to emerge. Ideally, these will be focused on student needs and stated in those terms. We've included some potential sample priority needs here to start the conversation and get ideas flowing. In order to determine what needs to be improved, we encourage school leadership teams to analyze multiple data sources. This will help the team better understand what knowledge, skills, and academic behaviors students need to build, as well as the changes needed in school practices, whether they are instructional, social emotional, or operational, in order to enhance student performance and achieve annual goals. When working with SLTs, we often hear that teams are unsure of which data sources they should be consulting. This slide includes some potential data sources that schools can use to inform the development of their annual goals. The School Quality Guide has a wide variety of data points, including the school's population and demographic information, school survey results, and student achievement outcomes. Schools can use end-of-year or summative assessment reports, as well as formative assessment and screener data. Student work samples can yield a great deal of qualitative insight into student understanding, as well as gaps in that understanding. Teacher observation information can be very helpful in determining what staff professional learning needs might be. We also recommend looking at non-academic data points like attendance and safety data as well. Schools that have been identified by New York State for Targeted Support and Improvement, TSI, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, ATSI, or Comprehensive Support and Improvement, CSI, are required to engage in a 5-part needs assessment. The first part is envisioning, exploring the school's vision, values, and aspirations. The second is analyzing internal and external data. The third part is analyzing survey data. The fourth part is engaging in an inventory around systems and structures. And the fifth part involves listening by interviewing students. These steps are considered best practices and can be valuable for all schools, but are required activities for schools identified for CSI, ATSI, or TSI. Please note that the terminology formerly used to describe schools in good standing has been changed to reflect that all schools can make improvement, which aligns with our continuous improvement model here in New York City. Schools that are not identified for TSI, ATSI, or CSI are considered schools identified for local support and improvement, or LSI. And the 5-step needs assessment, while not required for schools identified for LSI, is certainly considered a best practice. The equity self-reflection, which was required for schools identified for TSI, ATSI, or CSI in the past, is no longer required as a separate activity because equity considerations should be woven throughout the planning process, as opposed to being conducted as a separate activity. When selecting data sources, it's also important to ensure that the team is looking at a variety of data sources to highlight, confirm, or even question its initial impressions. We suggest incorporating different types of assessments, such as tests, portfolios, or student conferences, looking at assessments taken at different intervals, daily, end of unit, end of marking period, and on assessments given different weights, high stakes versus low stakes, to ensure you're looking at a complete data picture. In the next slide, we will discuss the importance of getting a broad range of student data. In addition to analyzing several different types of data, it's also important to analyze data from a range of students. What we mean is be sure to include students who represent different subgroups and levels of achievement. Include high, middle, and lower achieving students, students with and without IEPs, students who are current English language learners, former Ls, students who were never Ls, along with multilingual learners. In the next slide, we will discuss how, as a team, we come to developing a shared understanding of what the data is surfacing in relation to the skills needed to be addressed for each priority. Now that the school has analyzed a variety of data across multiple student groups in order to identify the student skill gaps, how do we come to a shared understanding of the skills needed to address the priority? What are the steps we can take or activities we can engage in to reach consensus? We can come to a shared understanding by using protocols to guide the team's conversation, making specific and objective observations from student work, and identifying patterns across students as well as skills that need additional development. Looking at multiple data sources. Identifying students' strengths, which is also part of the process. We're not just looking for the needs. Find ways to expand what works while addressing needs. And finally, coming to a consensus on the highest leverage skills that the school or teachers should tackle. While we've discussed the need to use multiple data sources and to analyze them over a representative student sample size, now we'd like to share some guiding questions to consider as your team engages in that analysis. For example, are there any concerns around equity in terms of access or resources between lower performing and higher performing groups of students? How effective are current programs and strategies based on the data? What are the implications for professional learning? You can use these questions, as well as the others on this slide, to help jumpstart the conversation. In the following slide, we will discuss the Affinity protocol as a strategy the team could use to make sense of the student data that was collected and analyzed. The Affinity protocol is one potential method which can help your team gather large amounts of data and organize them into groups or themes based on their relationships. The affinity process is great for grouping multiple data sources or ideas generated during team brainstorming sessions. At the end of the session, the team identifies patterns across all sets of student data or work and comes to a consensus on the highest leverage student skill that the team should address. This is your priority need. More detailed information is available at the Affinity Chart Protocol link on this slide. At this point in the process, it's a good idea to step back and ask some reflection questions to monitor our own internal progress during the planning process. Consider what gaps exist in student performance that the school must address to meet its goals. And also think about what data the team needs to dig into to answer the previous question as thoroughly and accurately as possible. Once the student performance gaps have been surfaced, the next step should be to identify instructional, programmatic, or other practices or factors in the school that might be contributing to the results the school is getting. After we have collected and analyzed student data and reached consensus as to the student's skills that need to be developed, the next step is to look at school practices and their impact on student performance. As we begin to explore school practices, it can be valuable to frame the conversation by posing some questions around school practices, including what instructional data will give us insight into those school practices. What practices are currently being used across the school? And sometimes even, are we using consistent approaches across grades and subject areas? Because sometimes a lack of cohesion or consistency in practices can lead to student skill gaps. And then finally, what are we not doing which may be contributing to those gaps? Similar to our approach when looking at quantitative academic and non-academic data points earlier in the needs assessment, as we begin to analyze school practices, we can suggest some potential qualitative data sources that can provide insight into school practices. These include quality review reports, looking at lesson plans and teachers' own reflections on their practice, the feedback provided to students on their assignments, staff and student interviews or focus groups, and interim surveys that provide the perspectives of parents, families, teachers, and students. One way to better understand school practices is observation, whether it occurs through a formal or informal process. And a potential strategy for capturing what is observed is taking low inference notes, which involves a description of observable facts or events without interpretation or judgment. Consider browsing some of the resources on weteachnyc.org for additional resources, including the Objectivity Specificity Matrix, which we will take a closer look at on the next slide. The Objectivity Specificity Matrix is a helpful tool for practicing the skill of observing and discussing instruction in a low inference and non-judgmental way. It can help observers distinguish between specific versus general statements, as well as descriptive versus judgmental statements. Keep in mind that the evidence collected should be both descriptive and specific, instead of general and judgmental. Notice the bottom left quadrant in the diagram for an example of observation data that is both descriptive and specific. Now that you have collected and analyzed school practice data, what is your next step? In the next slide, we will look at the Affinity protocol once again as a potential tool for making sense of the data. Earlier in this webinar, we looked at the Affinity protocol in the context of identifying a priority need based on quantitative student data. In this example, we'll use the Affinity protocol to organize school practice data. We can use the Affinity protocol to help manage and organize large amounts of data into groups or themes based on their relationships to each other. When organizing large amounts of observational data, consider elements of instruction like planning and preparation, stating clear lesson objectives, questioning, or assessing student learning. At the end of the protocol, the team should come to a consensus on the highest leverage instructional practices to address. Once your team has determined what its priority needs are and analyzed its data sources, the final piece in the comprehensive needs assessment process is determining root causes. It can be helpful to use a medical analogy to emphasize the importance of identifying and addressing root causes. We can treat the apparent symptoms of an illness by prescribing medication, but identifying and addressing the root cause of the illness will not only relieve our symptoms, but it will also put us on a path toward long-lasting health. Sometimes the investigation into a systemic, school-wide issue can be painstaking and messy, but arriving at the root cause will help the team create a plan that eliminates the problem permanently, builds school-wide capacity, and puts students on the path towards sustained academic success. There are many lenses through which we can help determine the root cause of an issue. We can use the Chancellor's priorities to look at academic subjects or elements of student wellness like safety and mental health, or engaging families as partners. The main idea is that viewing root causes from a variety of perspectives will support a more comprehensive approach to improving student achievement and attaining school-wide goals. On the next slide, we'll look at one potential protocol for conducting a root cause analysis. One popular protocol to support conducting a root cause analysis is the 5 whys. Basically, it entails defining the need and asking why this need is happening, then repeating and continuing to ask why. Typically, by the 5th why, the team will arrive at a root cause. In our example, the need is defined as declining student achievement on summative exams. The first why yields that students aren't studying enough for the exam. The second why yields that review materials were inadequate. The third why reveals that content from earlier in the year is underemphasized. The fourth why indicates that second semester teachers are responsible for reviewing the content from earlier in the year. And the final why informs us that teachers don't have enough opportunities to discuss course content between the first and second semesters. It's important to explore one reason deeply, as opposed to jumping between unrelated reasons, and focus on factors within the school's control when engaging in this protocol. This slide is designed as an opportunity for school teams to engage in their own 5 whys process. We've supplied another potentially common need around declining attendance. If you'd like to try this with your team, begin to ask why and remember to explore deeply, trying to avoid blame and focusing on factors within your school community's control. Once your team has identified its priority needs, deeply analyzed its data, and determined the root causes impacting school performance, the comprehensive needs assessment is complete. You'll use that information to begin developing SMART goals, which is step 3 in the CEP development process. This chart illustrates how priority needs, data trends, and root causes can be used to inform the goal-setting process. In order to support a coherent approach to planning so that the needs, goals, action steps, and progress targets all align, we recommend charting out the needs, data trends, and root causes identified during the needs assessment, and asking, once you've drafted a goal, is this goal responsive to the needs? And does it make sense based on the data points and root causes we've identified? Earlier in this webinar, we looked at this overview of the CEP development process and then deeply unpacked step 2, engaging in a needs assessment, during this session. You and your team should now be ready to move on to step 3, developing SMART goals that are aligned to your priority needs, data sources, and root causes. On this slide, we have included links that provide more detailed information on some of the protocols we shared during this webinar, like the Affinity Mapping Protocol and the Objectivity Specificity Matrix, as well as some other tools that your team may find useful, like the Notice and Wonder Protocol. For those watching this webinar on YouTube, we've included the links in the description below. Please note some of the key dates for CEP development in the timeline on this slide. We encourage you to circle June 16th on your calendar, as this is the deadline for schools to submit their draft CEPs in iPlan, and July 8th, which is the deadline for principals to complete the online budget attestation in iPlan. Schools will receive feedback over the summer and finalize their plans in the fall. After superintendent approval, plans will be publicly posted on the iPlan portal and on school web pages on a rolling basis. As always, We encourage you to reach out to your Director of State Federal Program Implementation, your DSFP, for any questions or to continue the conversation around educational planning. For technical assistance with iPlan, please email iplan@schools.nyc.gov. These links are also included in the description below. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this webinar, and we wish you a successful end to the school year and a productive planning cycle for the 2023-24 school year. We would love to hear your feedback on these webinar sessions. Please take a few minutes to let us know how we're doing, what we can do better, and what you'd like us to include in future sessions by completing the short survey via the link or QR code on this slide. Please note that the link and QR code both lead to the same survey, so you only need to do one or the other, not both. Thank you again for your time, and please reach out with any questions or concerns.